International Association of Universities, it is indeed my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar that forms part of a broader webinar series developed by the International Association of Universities on, as you see on the screen, the future of higher education. It is to look at short, medium, and long-term impacts of COVID-19 in particular, but also more broadly speaking, on the future of higher education in itself. We have so far discussed in the 6 previous webinars perspectives from around the world, low to middle to high income countries, and really to look at comparative approaches to the challenges that all the institutions around the world are facing. We have also looked twice at the impact on internationalization around the world. Internationalization at large, how to define it, what is it, where are we going? And then in the second webinar, we looked at the development of the strategies around internationalization in the current context, and also in light of strategies that were developed in the past and envisaged for the future. The third webinar was on the impact of COVID-19 in general, and presented the outcomes of the IAU Global Survey on the impact of COVID-19 on higher education around the world. And then we moved to the value-based higher education dimension and discussed the future of academic freedom. All of these webinars have been recorded, and this one will be the same. And we have presented them in a list that you can find on the IAU website. And we will share later on in the chat the link so that you can have a look at those and maybe even view them with your teams in your universities and discuss the various debates that have taken place and how you would see them translate in your own realities. Today, we are touching on something that many people are struggling with: how to reopen higher education today in your own contexts. And we will not have the answers as where to go or strict guidelines on what to do or really recommendations on what to do or not to do. But what we would wish to do today is really to discuss the different approaches that are being taken around the world and have the opportunity then also through the chat function to debate the opportunities that are out there or the different strategies that have been adopted. So we're very pleased here to have speakers from South Africa, from the USA, from the European Student Union, from Mexico, from the Association of Southeast Asian Institutes of Higher Learning, and from Thailand. And I now am very pleased to give the floor to the president of the International Association of Universities, Pam Fredman, who's based in Sweden. And so we'll bring also a little bit of perspective from the northern part of Europe. The floor is yours, Pam.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I welcome you all participants and through the chat or listening, and also, of course, all the panelists. And just a few words on the Swedish side, and that is when it comes to the reopening, I would say that there are many, many different initiatives taken. And in general, I would say that the insecurity, the unsecure situation, not knowing what will be on for the future and for the next coming semester is what everyone is struggling with. So from a Swedish or Nordic perspective, there is not one solution. But I think that it's important that we share and try to guide each other through this very, very complex situation for the whole higher education world. So we have an hour to bring forward questions and the panelists to give their views from different parts of the world. And I would like you to be strict on time, otherwise I will cut you off, because otherwise we will not have the time at the end to discuss your very interesting input and also to have a possibility for the people attending to give their questions by the chat. So I will start with introducing and giving the floor to Ahmed Baba, the Chief Executive Officer of University of South Africa. And the first question all panelists will go through is that we would like you to introduce yourself and also present a broader national and organizational context from which you will be speaking. So the floor is yours, Ahmed.
Thank you, Pam, and good afternoon, everybody in Paris and elsewhere. Um, just to say, first of all, thank you to the IAU for inviting me and to be on this panel again. Um, I'm the CEO of University South Africa, which is the umbrella body of South Africa's 26 public universities. And the universities altogether have about 1.2 million students. It's a part of the post-school education and training system, which altogether has about 2.5 million students. As you can imagine, like everywhere else in the world, the university system ground to a halt in March this year. And so we've been struggling really to try and come to grips with how to manage kind of the rest of the academic year. Some context, just to start by saying that in South Africa, the academic year runs from January to December. So most universities had approximately 5 to 6 weeks of lectures of teaching and learning before the lockdown occurred. And um, and the big challenge for us, of course, is that in South Africa, the major context is that the pandemic is nowhere near a peak at the moment. The numbers are still rising, and because of the impact of the lockdown on the kind of social economy of the country, the lockdown has been released and the economy has reopened, even though we are nowhere near the peak yet. And in fact, at this point in time, we are heading towards a very large kind of daily increases in the number of cases. Um, I should just say that the universities have begun a process of partial reopening. What I mean by that is that I'll explain that a little bit more in the next session. But what has been the really big challenge for the country has been to understand how to put in place big public health initiatives at the time when the pandemic is still growing, when in fact we are facing a massive growth in the number of cases. So it's a very different context from in other places. And what we've decided to do really is to try and understand what multiple pathways we can use to complete the academic year. So the slogan that's being used is that complete the academic year but save lives. And that's kind of the really big challenge for us. Pam, that takes me to 3 minutes, so I'm going to stop there and we'll pick up some of the points later on. Thank you.
It was me who had muted my mic. So I would like to give the floor to Brad Transport to give your views, the introduction and the first question.
Good morning, everyone from Washington, D.C., to our friends and colleagues around the world. We are talking to you from the American Council on Education. We're a private association of colleges and universities. We are the largest and the most comprehensive of the private associations in the United States, and we represent all the sectors of higher education. I am the vice president for global engagement, and we are very pleased to have a long and fruitful collaboration with the IAU, and I want to congratulate them on putting on this webinar. I know it's going to be a very good event. So a bit about the context in the United States. I think it's very difficult to make a general statement about our entire country at this point. As you know, the US leads the world in the number of cases and the number of deaths for COVID-19. 2.9 million confirmed cases and 130,000 deaths as of yesterday. So we're experiencing a very serious crisis here in the United States, but at the same time, we see a lot of regional variation. We see, for example, in Washington, D.C., the situation has significantly improved, and elsewhere on the East Coast, including places like New York City. At the same time, in states in the American Southwest, such as Texas and Arizona, and even as far west as California, we're seeing a significant spike in the number of cases as we start to relax some of the rules on social distancing. And so with that as a context, I will just say a few things about our sector. If you look at the OECD figures, the United States is near the top of the world in the percentage of funding that comes from private sources. And that includes student tuition, it includes endowments, it includes grants, and it includes gifts from alumni. So that means that we have a relatively wealthy sector for higher education. It also means that we're very vulnerable to shocks to the larger economy. And so we're seeing that in terms of all types of declines in revenue for our institutions. They're telling us, particularly smaller institutions, are very concerned about their ability to remain open for the fall. And one of our most important tasks at ACE is to ensure that the government support for business also includes support for higher education, particularly for those smaller institutions that are really in deep crisis right now. The only thing I will add is that, I think this is going to be a recurring theme today, the acceleration of a trend. The trend really began in 2008 with our local and state governments reducing the amount of support for higher education. This is not anything new. This has been going on for about 10 years, but what we're seeing now is an acceleration of that trend. And I see that we just have a slide come up. My time is up, so maybe what I will do is reserve that slide for my next round of remarks. Yes, I'm at time.
That's good. Yeah, thank you very much. And we will see that slide to the next question.
Yes, please.
So then I give the floor to Robert. It's important also that the students, you are as affected as everyone else, but it's very crucial, I know, for the students all around the world, regardless of where you are. So please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone from Brussels. I am Robert Napier, and I'm originally from the tiny island of Malta, but currently the president of the European Students' Union. Just a bit of a platform about what we are, a bit of a background. The European Students' Union is the umbrella organization of 45 national students' union in the European continent and within the European higher education area. But we also work very closely with other regional platforms, and in fact have recently founded the Global Students Forum, which is the global student representative voice from across the world. Over the past months, we have seen that the current pandemic has indeed had a huge impact on the life of students in Europe and beyond that. One of the biggest problems that we need to understand, and that has been reiterated, and I'm sure is not the first time that you are hearing it, is the fact that over the past months, we have not had digital learning, but rather we had teaching and learning, which has gone online due to the emergency that arose. I am seeing some comments that some people cannot hear me, but if you can confirm that I am being heard. Yes, okay, you can hear me. Very good. One of the biggest problems is that very good. One of the biggest problems is that at the moment we are dealing with emergency education and not really digital education. And this has had a huge impact on the students and the quality of education that students have been receiving. One other crucial note is over the past month, as soon as the pandemic hit, we have managed to send out a survey to students, which approximately received between 17 and 18,000 responses from across Europe. And it was very, very astonishing to see that a staggering 13% of these respondents have actually replied that they are suffering through some mental health issues. Now, 13% of this figure is a very huge amount, and this is something that needs to be taken into consideration and really understood from the different perspectives. Because the emotional and mental problems that arose because of this pandemic are not to be ignored, and the impact that this has on the academic life is also to really be highlighted at the moment. Apart from that, there was also the issue of resources, and I will tackle a bit more because I know that my time is running up. But the issue of resources and the quality of resources and the quality of information that students were receiving was also very problematic. We have seen that only less than 50% of students seem to have had a stable internet connection, for example, and that makes you wonder not about the quality of education that the lecturers were preparing, but about the quality of education that students were being able to follow from their households. And here, especially in particular, students who are coming from underrepresented, minority, and disadvantaged groups that definitely need to be prioritized in the aftermath of this pandemic. But I will catch on these points in my next intervention.
So thank you very much, Robert, for giving us this. And I give the floor to Sylvia.
Yes, hello. Good morning from Mexico. I am the provost of a private university, a private Jesuit university, which is part of a network of universities, of Jesuit universities in Mexico and in Latin America, and I will be speaking from there. On July 1st, Latin America had 2,500,000 cases of infection by COVID-19 and 116,000 deaths. Brazil accounts for 26% of the cases and 23% of the deaths. Strategies in all countries are oriented towards containing the expansion of the virus through quarantine and social distancing measures. But in Latin America, this affects primarily economic activities. Latin America starts out in the pandemic in a weaker position than the rest of the world. Latin America is the most unequal region in the world. And the Gini index is expected to rise in 1 or 2 points. So this inequality is getting worse on account of the pandemic. We are now expecting an economic contraction of 5.3% as an average in Latin America. But in Mexico, for example, up to 10% is expected according to the IMF. And this is the most severe contraction in the history of the region. The increase in the amount of people living in poverty will be of at least 30 million. And extreme poverty has grown in 2.5 percentage points from 11 to 13.5, which accounts for 16 million more people. In Mexico alone, it is estimated that 500,000 small businesses have shut down and that 12 million persons have lost their jobs or their source of income, because as you know, in Latin America, around 50% of the workforce is in the informal sector of the economy. So unemployment rates are reaching 11.5%, which for the region means almost 40 million people. And this, of course, we believe should pose an opportunity for some structural reform that can reverse inequality and foster employment. The first cases in Latin America were during the first half of February. Universities in Mexico shut down between March 11th and March 17th, when in most universities, from 1/2 to 2/3 of the spring term had already elapsed, and universities have not opened since then. Some were able to transit to distant teaching, but only some countries, such as Uruguay, and a few private universities, such as my own, that were technologically, but not necessarily pedagogically equipped to do so, were able to make this transition in 1 week. Most, however, only began distance teaching 1 or 2 months later, with severe difficulties for reaching all of their students due to limited access to technology. UDUAL, which is the Latin American Association of Universities, estimates that 30% of university students in Mexico have no access to the internet, and only 44.3% of the households in the country own a computer. So this includes the fact that universities are being economically hit, and they have to invest in technology at the same time that they're being economically, their resources are being reduced. But it also affects particularly students. so we can foresee an increase of university dropouts in the near future. So there is an educational impact also, which is affecting those in more difficult economic situation. I'll leave it there and then come back to the
Thank
other
you.
issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the last panelist is Shusakti. I introduce you.
Hello. I have to say good morning, good afternoon, and good night, right? So here in Thailand is at night times. So I'm a president of KMTL, a leading science technology university in Thailand, and also serve as the chairman of University President Council of Thailand, and also president of ASEAN Institution of Higher Learning, or ASIHUS. We just organized the World Online Congress 2020 on COVID-19, the global new reality. And thank you very much, Pam, that you joined as a keynote speaker. We learned a lot of things from you. So COVID-19 in Thailand, I would say COVID-19 is a disruptor. Can you believe that before COVID-19 in Thailand, we invest a huge budget and also huge effort on online education for the past 5 years. A lot of money on online course and internet system. But believe it or not, students and teachers, they didn't respond well. So even we put a lot of money and a lot of effort. And then COVID came. It changed everything. Microsoft come to us and gave us data that before COVID-19, overall Thailand online education is about 10,000 students that join online classes. But overnight, within a week, after COVID-19, we closed our university and jump into the online education system. Can you believe that? From 10,000 to almost 500,000 in a week, the student join the online system. So this is the beginning, and we hope that this probably create a momentum to the big change in Thailand too. However, we have a lot of big challenge. First, we're gonna open the university the 1st of August. Because of social distancing policy, students have to be apart, so we don't have enough classroom. So this is a big problem. So we have to manage our class very well. We have to reschedule again and again, and probably we have to use multi education system. It means online together with offline in class system. So this is gonna be a lot of headache. So for the first session, I just put in this way. So waiting to come back. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you very much. And now I see Ahmed back. I thought that there should be another order to the next question, but I go back to you, Ahmed, and ask you to respond to the second question, and that is what kind of reopening strategies could you share with the audience listening to this today, and which everyone can bring back as an influence?
Thank you so much, Pam. What we've adopted in South Africa is the kind of multiple pathways to the completion of the academic year. The idea was that very much that universities will engage both on kind of online learning, emergency teaching and learning, to be honest, but understanding that there are deep inequalities in our system, which are both at the institutional level and between institutions, so that the delivery of emergency teaching via online kind of technologies may not have been the solution to the problem. And so we've also decided that we must have a phased reopening of the campuses, even in the face of the rising number of COVID cases and so on. So at the moment, we are at the stage where 1/3 of the students can return to campus and 1/3 can return to the residences on campus. The idea is that very much that when students are on campus, the bulk of the teaching and learning will be done through blended learning, will be kind of really done on a technology basis, and that there's been a massive investment in the kind of public health interventions, if you like, to try and ensure that there's a continuing care, if you like, to preventing the spread of the virus. And perhaps most importantly, I should just mention that there's a very strong partnership between the National Department of Health and the university, so that if there are outbreaks, then there's a close collaboration between the Department of Health and the universities. The biggest challenge we have, of course, is the challenge of the most vulnerable students who do not have access to the internet and so on. And so for many of the universities, those will be the first students that come back onto campus so that they can use campus-based facilities, if you like. What COVID-19 has done, unfortunately, is really torn apart, the inequality fault lines, if you like. I mean, it really has shown us just how unequal our system is. And that, of course, is going to be a long-term challenge for us. And the partial reopening will go ahead now with the reintroduction in about a month's time of another third of the students. Of course, this will depend very much on what is happening with the pandemic. But the idea is very much that the whole academic year will be reconstituted, even if it means that we run into 2021 to complete the academic year. So what that means essentially is that even if we begin in September, say, we will run till April and then complete the academic year and have a late intake next year. Thank you, Pam. That's 3 minutes up again.
Thank you very much. And then I see that Shatwi, you are the next online.
Yes. So very interesting,
And the
Pam.
question is the same.
Yeah. So for the reopening strategy, right? That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Normally we waiting as a professor and a university president. We are looking for to welcome the new students for my university. For the freshmen, it's about 6,000 students a year. So normally we're gonna have orientation event. Can you believe that 6 to 7,000 students packed on conference, university conference hall? So we cannot do that. So we're gonna miss that. So what we do, we invent the online orientation system. So this is the new thing, never done before, but we have to. So this is the first thing that's gonna happen very soon. And also, normally university have to welcome parents and students that want to visit university. So thousand parents and students they want to visit university. So what can we do? So we invent game. So the game, the student can join the game and visit the classroom, they visit the buildings or university stadium. So that is very interesting. So we create the game and ask students to join. So it's a lot of fun. So I put this way, even COVID is a bad thing that happened, but it may create something very new. A loss of education, innovation happen at the same time too. So this is what happened. But however, a loss of challenge, a loss of challenging happen also. We have a difficult time to manage classroom. So we have to reschedule of all the class, particularly the class of general education that all students from different departments had to join together. This is not that easy, but we try our best that we want to manage as best as we can do. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And then back to the students' version. So, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. From my side, I will highlight what we think is very important to be prioritized in the reopening of universities and institutions over the coming months. And I will highlight them mainly on four more points. The slide that you are seeing, I will come back to it in the last point, not now. But one thing that I really want to highlight and that upon what Ahmed was saying is particularly the point of inclusion, especially as we move towards blended learning. We need to make sure that that inclusivity is really embedded in everything that we are doing in order to secure that we do not have a bigger gap between those who can thrive and those who need more support in their studies. The issue of blended learning also reminds me a lot of the topic of mobility, which so far has not really been mentioned a lot. Mobility has been, especially in this globalization that we are going through, mobility has been a pillar of higher education over the past years. And we really need to secure that in the reopening and going back to the new normal, the mobility is not lost, because mobility is extremely important. Unfortunately, at least here in Europe, we have been hearing a lot the word blended mobility and the words virtual mobility. But it's very, very important to highlight that being mobile requires someone to move from point A to point B, meaning that sitting behind a screen and attending a lecture in another university is not mobility in itself. And whilst we understand the necessity of moving towards having virtual mobility and blended mobility, this cannot become the norm, because the benefits of mobility themselves still outweigh anything that can happen online, and therefore this really needs to be prioritized. Thirdly, I really want to highlight the involvement and information of students as you reopen and come up with strategies for reopening of universities. Unfortunately, we have seen the case on the global level and not just at the European level, the fact that because of the pandemic was being used as an excuse to leave students out of the decision-making structures, out of the decision-making meetings. This should never be the case, because the students need to be informed and need to be involved in making these decisions. And the lack of information, we fear, was one of the reasons that led to the rise in mental health problems that I spoke about in the beginning. Because the students, if they do not know what's going to happen, and we understand, obviously, we are not expecting any miracles. We understand that the institutions themselves needed time to come up with a plan on how to proceed. But now more than ever, especially as we plan for the next academic year, it is absolutely crucial that the students are involved and informed all along. And lastly, it's also the need to focus a lot on student support services. Now more than ever, in order to also reduce the gap and to offer everyone the chance to succeed in their studies without creating or putting anyone at a disadvantage, we need holistic student support services. We need holistic student support services varying from mental health supports to grant systems to help with accommodation. It's not simply the money issue, but also then the resources that the students must have access to, people to speak to about what they are going to, emotional support, physical support, whatever they might need. And especially for those who are coming from disadvantaged and vulnerable groups, these will be the ones that will require even more holistic student support services. I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I see Sylvia is the next to be given the floor.
Yes, thank you, Pam. Well, in Latin America, there's a vast array of situations for reopening strategies, but I would say that most universities are aiming to return to face-to-face teaching when possible. The most common strategy seems to respond to the need to live with the pandemic, not to wait until it can be prevented or controlled. So most universities are developing blended models and strict safety measures for face-to-face teaching. Governments are developing clear guidelines for sanitary and preventive measures, like entrance filters, social distancing, the wearing of masks, frequent cleaning of classrooms and equipment, strict identification of risks and close follow-up of cases, and specific measures with at-risk population, among others. In the case of my university, we are respecting our original schedule, beginning the fall term on the 10th of August at a distance. We are redesigning all of our courses, which were originally designed for face-to-face teaching, to be courses at a distance, and training our faculty and part-time teachers in the process of redesigning the courses. This way, we can either offer the courses at a distance or face-to-face. We are planning for 25 to 33% occupation of the premises when allowed. Face-to-face courses are going to prioritize labs, laboratories, workshops, and first-year students, because we find that it's very important for first-year students to have a campus experience. But all students must take at least 2 courses that are face-to-face whenever possible, that are blended. Blended groups are limited to 50% of our usual capacity, and distance groups are limited to 20 students. So this has involved getting many more teachers. We are following very strict government guidelines, as well as our own, which are even stricter. And the idea is to recognize what we have lost educationally when having to go remote, and to recuperate this loss whenever possible. And this loss involves the possibility to discuss, to do collaborative work, to develop critical thinking, to contact with social reality, informal interactions, the occult curriculum of the campus, and also to capitalize on what we have learned about the advantages of technology and what can be achieved well at a distance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then Brad is back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. On reopening strategies, I would like to refer to one of the slides that I prepared. This one, yes, thank you. And I apologize for the small size of the print, but all of these slides will be available to our participants at the conclusion of the program. What I want to emphasize here, and actually this list continues on for a second page. So what I want to emphasize is, in the US context, the hybrid approach, where there's a combination of online and face-to-face instruction, really includes many different models and many different approaches. If you think of it as a spectrum from entirely normal operations to entirely online operations, we have many different gradients and many different approaches that we're taking. They're influenced by a whole range of factors. As I said, we're seeing tremendous regional variability in the United States as far as the prevalence of COVID-19 is concerned. We have many campuses that are predominantly commuting campuses, where the students are living at home or off campus and then are coming to campus for classes. We also have, of course, many residential institutions. And then, of course, we're concerned about the mode of instruction. My wife is an art professor, and seeing her students face to face is very important to her, although she does have the capacity to teach online if necessary. So what we're seeing, as you can see, is a tremendous amount of experimentation on the part of our members. When we recently surveyed university presidents, they told us that they're preparing the majority of institutions are preparing multiple options. So on this list you see here, you can expect an institution to have 2, 3, or even 4 different scenarios for the semester that's coming up this fall. The most common is a combination of online and face-to-face instruction, the hybrid model. That's about 3/4 of institutions. Another 1/4 of our institutions are hoping to be able to return to normal operations, where all instruction is face-to-face. I think the next 2 months are going to be extremely important, and it's very likely that our institutions will make further adjustments. So one of the things, if I've got a couple of minutes here, I'll just go into a couple of these examples. And again, I apologize for the print size. If you look at the 5th one down, block scheduling, this is where a semester is actually broken up into very short terms, where the student is only taking 1 or 2 courses for a relatively short period of time. The advantage of this is that if COVID-19 does become more severe in a particular area and it's necessary to suspend or to go online for part of the semester, this will allow the completion of individual courses. And so this has been attractive for some institutions. And if you go down a couple of more, you see modified tutorial model. This is where the students take a common lecture virtually. So imagine a very large class with hundreds of students. They're receiving a lecture online from the primary instructor, the professor for the course, but then they're also meeting face-to-face in much smaller groups. And as you know, many of the restrictions are on the size of classes. So this allows access to senior faculty, but at the same time gives the students the opportunity to meet in small groups and have more interaction with graduate student instructors. So I will stop there. And I see a question that's specifically about the new policy on the part of the United States on international students. I think I'll wait until the questions to cover that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I go back to Robert. And now we are at the last question. And of course, always when we see those challenges, of course, there are a lot of problems, a lot of challenges that we have to meet. But often we can also see opportunities. And in my own perspective, I think it's important to raise also opportunities to get something good out of this for the future. So we have asked you to give 3 challenges and 3 opportunities each. And I give the floor to Robert first.
Thank you very much. From my side, as you rightly said, I think with everything that happens, and especially with this pandemic, there are challenges that we realize, but definitely we can look at the positive side and try to look also at the opportunities. I have highlighted, which in my opinion are the 3 biggest challenges that we will be facing over the next years in particular. And the first one is that we need to somehow ensure the same conditions for study success. I think we cannot kid ourselves in the sense of saying that the impact of the current pandemic will not continue to be felt in the remainder of the academic life of students. And this is something that we truly need to take into consideration. And most particularly, we need to take it into consideration to make sure that those students who are still about to enter into the higher education will have the same chances of succeeding and will have the same opportunities of succeeding in higher education. And this is something that will definitely not be easy for the institutions themselves. Then we also need to balance the mobility, the issue of mobility, as I was saying before. We need to make sure that in the globalization spirit, we do not allow the current pandemic to fuel the negative perspectives that usually are put forward by those who are not sure about the advantages of globalization. And we need to continue putting this forward also as part of the democratic global citizenship that students should always live by, especially within higher education. And again, another challenge is to shift from the emergency learning and teaching that we are now into the digital learning and teaching that we should be investing upon. It was nice to hear that, for example, in Thailand, yes, they have already been investing a lot in various tools of learning and teaching, but this shift is still very evident, and still a lot of countries and a lot of institutions up to this very day are still offering emergency tools for dealing with learning and teaching rather than inclusive digital learning and teaching tools. And this brings me then to the opportunity. So the opportunity in this regard is to make sure that when we are developing, that we use this pandemic to learn from it, to actually give as much as possible and use as much as possible inclusive tools for digitalizations. And by inclusive tools, I specifically mean especially ensuring that everyone has the exact same access and equitable access to the digital tools that are being provided by the institutions for the lectures to be going on. And furthermore, to make sure that the digital tools allow for the student-centered learning. We are already usually challenged a lot about the idea of student-centered learning because we are asked, how can you have student-centered learning at an institution where in one class you have 200, 300 students? And in person, it's already a big challenge to ensure student-centered learning, and digitally, it's an even bigger challenge. But we need to take this opportunity to develop the right tools, to develop the right structures to be able to offer this. Something else that we need to use as an opportunity is also a sustainable return to the new normality. Unfortunately, we haven't heard a lot about the word sustainability, which is usually a buzzword that is thrown around a lot. But in practice, sustainability means a lot. Sustainability in the way that it is integrated into our curricula, sustainability in finances, sustainability in organizations, sustainability of the institutions. All these matters need to be really embedded in the future curricula in order to make sure that we have a sustainable return to normality, even going hand in hand with the issue of mobility. And lastly, we should also use this as an opportunity to invest, to have a more holistic approach to the student support services. As I was saying before, every problem that arose now requires a response and requires a coordinated response with the help of institutions, with coordination, especially among the different regions, etc., etc. And it requires to be a holistic approach because it needs to tackle the various aspects that have affected students over the last few months. So I will leave it at that, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions in the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. And Shativi, you are back on giving your challenges and opportunities, which I know has been discussed also in webinars in your country a lot.
Yes. So it's very clear that about opportunities. I think COVID-19 disrupt online education in Thailand and the rest of the world. As I mentioned before COVID-19 came, online education, even you put a lot of money, a lot of effort, people still love to stay in comfort zone. They still enjoy, teach, and study in the same way for, and it says, hundreds years, right? So after COVID-19, online education born in Thailand, honestly. So if we can keep the momentum like this, so we're going to have an online course that the people can join and people can create a lot of very interesting online classes. So this is what we hope. So this is clearly opportunity. However, I would like to talk about challenge. That's very interesting. I don't want to tell about student because Robert made it clear. Of course, in Thailand, in Southeast Asia country, the issue of equality is always important. Of course, for the student who live in city to access internet and online class probably is easier than student who live in countryside, right? And also student who live in countryside probably they don't have a lot of money. The question is who pay for the accessibility, the government or their parents. But so far, the government subsidize a lot. But in the long term, this is still questionable. So this is how can we accommodate all students or the country that can access the online education system at the same time, at the same level. However, the problem is right here. Teacher, Pam, I tell you a story. During the online education in Thailand, the online education have hashtags. Number one for a week. What happened is that many people enjoy uploading online class that teacher make mistake to show everyone that is wrong, that is wrong. And people make fun of teacher because they make mistake. So teacher in online education have to be evaluated at real time. So it means that teacher can become vulnerable professionals. This is not that easy. So a lot of teachers become very upset and they're not there enough to be in camera. So this is not that easy. So the problem how we educate society that teacher, I mean, like other professional, it's no perfect. So give them some time to adapt themselves or disrupt themselves to the online education. And at the same time, we have to encourage teacher to fight for it, to improve themselves. This is not that easy either. So this is the challenge that happened here in Thailand. Thank you,
Thank
Pam.
you. Thank you very much. I think thank you for bringing up the teacher situation, because that is something which has to be considered. And we talk about health problems, and that might be a great concern. So I go back to Brad.
Thank you. Could we show the second slide? And that is going to be my first challenge, the financial challenge. I referenced that in my introductory remarks, but we are expecting, as you can see, a decrease in enrollments for the fall with most of the sectors in U.S. higher education. And as I said, we have a sector that's very sensitive to declines in tuition and other sources of private revenue. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two is support for students in a remote environment. And this includes mental health issues, which were already, as I said, many of the things we're talking about today are the acceleration of existing trends. So we have been very concerned about student mental health for many years in the US. Our presidents are telling us that they believe the problem is becoming more serious as students work remotely and they're more isolated from their friends and classmates. And then the third challenge is implementation. Simply, the plans that I showed you on that previous slide are enormously complex. They have never been tried in most situations. Something will very likely go wrong, and institutions will be very challenged to make adjustments as circumstances change in the US. So on to the opportunities. Number one is the rethinking of the international student experience and really finding digital solutions to a lot of the challenges of attracting and educating international students. I would include this one also would include the option of reaching international students before they come to your country and finding ways to engage them online before they even arrive. I also think that this will involve partnerships in the student's home country, delivering some of the instruction live in the student's home country before they come to the United States or the UK or whatever their ultimate destination is. So that's opportunity number one. Opportunity number two is, I think the digital divide is something that we're all very concerned about. This finding that many students do not have adequate access to broadband internet, they do not have access to equipment, they do not have access to a quiet place to work and to study. This has really opened up I think, a tremendous opportunity for us to address what we think is a major equity problem in the United States. And ACE is working with the federal government on this, and I think there are lots of opportunities there. And finally, opportunity number three is really rethinking the financial model. So what a lot of students are saying is they would rather pay a lower tuition and receive a much more basic experience that really focuses on classroom learning. A lot of the extracurriculars, a lot of the support services, they see as optional, and they would like to have an option of paying a lower tuition and forgoing a lot of those options. So really rethinking the whole tuition model, the whole business model for higher education, I think, is opportunity number three.
Thank you very much for sharing this. And then Ahmed.
Thank you, Pam, and it's been a very rich discussion. Um, in South Africa, the really major short-term crisis is the financial crisis. I mean, all 26 universities are facing an enormous challenge in terms of their just managing the crisis for 2020. And there are three major kind of drivers of this. The one is a decrease in tuition fees. The second is the huge expenditure in trying to get emergency teaching going at very short notice. And the third one is the kind of the great expenses in preparing campuses for the reopening of campuses. So there's that, and secondly, the South African economy has been absolutely shattered as we're seeing in other parts of the world, and so there are also deep concerns about state funding for higher education. Um, the second big challenge is this challenge of long-term sustainability. That's not just about the economy. That's also about the nature of the teaching and learning, the nature of research, the funding for research, the nature of the relationship between universities and the economy, and so on. So there's deep concerns about the long-term sustainability, and there's a whole range of task teams working on trying to understand, get a better grip of this. And the third is what was referred to by earlier on, which is the issues around the demand for higher education. We think that there's a potential coming out of COVID-19 that there might be a decline in demand for higher education, and that is likely to have a very serious kind of a set of implications for the system. On the opportunities side, all the presenters have referred to this disruptive moment with regard to online learning. And for us, it seems to us at least that the key issue is the issue that was raised by Brad, which is the issue around trying to ensure that there's much more equitable access to online teaching and learning, and that it's not just simply about kind of getting new systems in place and so on, but ensuring that there's equitable access, which is a very major issue with us. And secondly, around that issue, is this great opportunity, it seems to me, as Brad was referring to, I think, as well, this issue of different forms of delivery, different forms of student demand, much more flexible learning, and so on. So those are things that are being looked at even now. The second is it seems to us that this disruption is also an ideal opportunity for us to rethink the relationship between universities and society. This idea that universities have grown apart from society in many respects, that there's a trust deficit, that this is an opportunity to revisit that, and in particular to look at the implications of what we've learned in the last year or so with regard to the knowledge project and development, the knowledge project and the SDGs and so on. So really kind of configuring the knowledge project of universities in the context of building stronger connections between university and society. And then the third one is just this really big challenge of trying to understand how to, as an opportunity, about how to understand the management of universities during periods of great uncertainty. The uncertainty has been wrecking us, and we are now in the process of trying to understand better what kinds of modeling and so on will help us to deal with these big uncertainties that we are facing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And Sylvia?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, for us, one of the challenges is definitely the need to train faculty and professors as agents of pedagogical and technological change, not as mere users of technology and of pedagogical change. They have to be the agents of change. And the question is how to train them to become that. And this includes issues such as engaging students. Students are complaining that classes are boring, that they are not being able to become engaged, that they don't feel that they are living balanced lives, etc. Screen fatigue is something that has come up as a very severe problem during this pandemic, and the need to diversify activities and to make learning more holistic. This is part of the first challenge. The second challenge is to design an effective and safe hybrid model, which is able to take advantage of technology and also to prioritize what is important to do when we are able to be face-to-face. So we have to have more online courses, not only distance or remote courses, but really online courses, asynchronous online courses. And this involves also the challenge of continuing all university activities to be able to give students a holistic approach to learning. And this includes cultural, artistic, sports, spiritual, intellectual, psychological support, etc. And the design of a safe but intense and satisfying life on campus for both students and professors. This idea of having to live with the virus. Now we have to learn to live that. And that means, yes, try to have safe, definitely safe, because that is the first thing we have to take care of, the life of our students, the lives of our students and teachers and all of our community, but also a satisfying life on campus for both students and professors. And the third challenge is to rethink ourselves. I think this has been mentioned already by my colleagues. Society is going to change. So we hope that taking advantage of the pandemic to design routes towards universal well-being and sustainable living is something that we can start thinking about on account of this crisis. Universities will have to change to both adapt to social changes, but more importantly, reduce knowledge generation and train professionals to foster needed transformations that are becoming very, very evident. And the opportunities are of course, having learned to use technology, and then we are continuing to learn to use technology as a powerful tool, but never as an end in itself. And another opportunity is internationalization. This is something that I think we have discovered, though internationalization through virtual means has been possible for a long time. We are now discovering that we can internationalize virtually and experimenting with diverse ways of doing so through visiting professors, international students, course sharing, international conference and seminars. And this has acquired more importance than ever after being and is being taken advantage of. And finally, our last opportunity is reflecting on the educational value of face-to-face interaction and to discover the need to develop pedagogical approaches to take advantage of the virtues of face-to-face education in order to better combine distance and face-to-face education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you. It was a lot of information, and I think it was very good of you sharing this with the whole audience and in the sector. And I would like to ask you, is it possible that IAU could have your 3 challenges and 3 opportunities written down so we can share them, because that is very important for us and the organizations to go forward. If that's possible, please do that. To wrap up, there is a lot of things to say, and I see that we do share the same challenges and the same issues. And I would like to just wrap up and saying that, of course, we are seeing that there will be a need of support financially for students and for anyone to see to that equity is kept up, and for technology to be developed in all countries and in all higher education institutions. I also see that it's important to continue to think about the teacher situation, and not at least the student and their perspective, because they are the one who will be in the university, not only now, but also for the future. And they will be the one who will be also important for sustainable development, which was raised by Robert. And something that actually almost all countries has ratified, the Agenda 2030. And why not taking that agenda as a platform now to go forward and try to promote together for higher education and the importance of that, and also then take the experience of this pandemic which is going on, and we had to live with it. But we have already got experience which are good, but many experience that does not go together with quality in higher education and so on. So a short question to all of you is, what could an organization like IAU do to help to promote that higher education is developing from this pandemic experience to be public good or something that is considered very seriously from the governments all around the world? I start with Ahmed. I go back to the first order.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, I think that this is the time, for us to really try and understand how we can construct a kind of a high education globally as a kind of as a global enterprise. Something that kind of really binds us all together around the big global challenges that we face. And up to now, it's been mired in kind of in global politics, in the shifting kind of relationships between countries and so on. But I think that now is the time for us to think about the possibility of an organization like the IAU and others to begin to help to reconstitute the global commons of knowledge and the global commons of scholarship and so on, and to correct the huge imbalances that exist in terms of not necessarily in terms of resources, but in terms of the way in which decisions are made and so on. So I think that this is a very important opportunity for us. It is a disrupted moment, and there is an opportunity for us to reconstitute kind of global scholarship and global knowledge commons and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Brad?
Well, I think that IAU is in a really powerful position to help institutions around the world with the challenges and opportunities that we're talking about here today. And I'm going to use the word innovation hub, which is a business term. So for those of you who are familiar with business education, I really see IAU as a clearinghouse for effective practices for all those institutions around the world that are experimenting with hybrid learning, with all the different challenges that we're seeing. I think IAU is in the best position to really serve as a clearinghouse for what is effective and is promising in terms of future practice. Just one example of this on this question of the digital divide. I think that the best solution has still not been created. It's going to be some sort of a three-way partnership among higher education, government, and the private sector. And I don't have a solution. I wish I did, but I think the solution is out there. I think one of our countries is going to come up with something quite brilliant. And when they do, I think IAU is in the best position to share that with the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. That's important. And Roberto? Robert?
Thank you very much, Ben. I would really say that at the moment is the crucial time to make universities and institutions more relevant than ever before. Unfortunately, rather than seeing it, like I don't seem to see that there will be a decline in the interest of higher education, but rather the benefit of it. I mean, it's the time to shape the solutions, and the solutions come from the institutions. And IAU as an organization, as an association, plays a crucial role in promoting this, and plays a crucial role also in using the current circumstances to also promote as much as possible the critical thinking and the democratic missions of the institutions, because it is this which shapes holistically the role of the institutions and which allows us to be more ready for any similar situations in the future. At the moment, at the European level, we are working on drafting the ministerial communiqué, which is the declaration that the ministers of higher education, in Europe, in the European higher education area, will make when they meet together, hopefully in Rome or online in November. And there we are really focusing on 3 I's. And these 3 I's, I think, are crucial to IAU, to all organizations, and to everyone working in higher education. And the 3 I's are inclusiveness, innovation, and interconnectivity. And especially, I will just speak of the last one because inclusiveness and innovation are quite clear what we mean by them. But interconnectivity is a very important and crucial aspect that we need to highlight now. It's the connection that exists between the institutions, between the stakeholders, and between the providers and the receivers of the education. And this is something that really, really needs to be highlighted at the moment.
Thank you very much. Sylvia? Thank you very much. And then back to Sushati.
Thank you. Can you imagine? Right now, I have a chance to discuss with you all experts from different continents, from different time zones. So this is, it's amazing. Can you imagine before COVID, we don't have this kind of chance, right? We have to set up the conference that you love to visit, European country, Asian, Americans, continents. But now we can share no matter where we come from, no matter time zone. So I think this is amazing. I think I love to support IAU. What you're doing right now, amazing. You have to keep doing this more and more. And I support you. And also, I think right now, people, if they want to learn about education, about how COVID changed, it's difficult to find resources. I think IAU website or Facebook, you have to do documents or mini research that people can download it and then they can share online. So people will know IAU even much more. So keep doing this great job. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much, all of the panel. And then I will leave to Hillage for I know that there is a lot of questions in the chat forum, and I think we will give an opportunity to have them answered also and brought up. So I leave the floor to you, Hillage.
Thank you very much. I see indeed there are quite a few questions in the chat box as well. At the same time, it is really intriguing to see how the different speakers from around the world seem to agree on a certain number of challenges and the solutions to be found. And that is also part of the magic, I think, of this kind of a format where you can bring together these different voices and then see where we divert or where we come together. I was struck by the fact that there seems to be many more guidelines from governments right now, and also guidelines that are then adapted and adopted by institutions. I think it was Sylvia who spoke about it. It was also Brad. As you alluded to a few, all of you also in the Asian regions or in Africa, it would be very good indeed if we could share these guidelines with the broader higher education community, because many people, all those in participating today and participating in this webinar series, are looking for different kinds of solutions. Where is it that we can go? What is it that we can do? What are the opportunities and what are the challenges still? So Brad, you're on the screen now, and yes, the many different models that have been adopted. We had to cut them into slides because we wanted to make them a bit more readable. But if you agree, we will share them with the people who participated today, but more largely as well, because they deserve to be known better and then also interpreted in different contexts to see where they would match other practices and where maybe they would be met with even other innovative solutions to the reopening strategies. Sure. I would like you to maybe speak to that just a little bit more, because you work with governments a lot, but so do the others, and that would be nice to also see what new role universities have played in informing policy and how to retain that very opportunity for the future as well, because there has been a new light shed on different roles that universities play in society. And then, since we will be running out of time very quickly, I also heard very strongly by Sushatwi something that is shoved under carpets too often, and that is the difficult role for the teaching profession, where if indeed there is this the teacher and professor bashing when students start to download and ridicule professors, this is a big threat to the very profession, to the ethical dimensions that we need to safeguard for the future of higher education, because we're all trying, we're all doing our best, and it is not because we're online that every word should all of a sudden have a different weight, because that is what it will be as well. And professors may be attacked on words that they've used which would have worked in a classroom setting and is very different online. It's the same for students and for anyone. And so maybe you could look at those two aspects, and I will start with you, Brad.
Thanks, Ilya. First of all, we're, as many of you know, a very decentralized system in the United States, and a lot of the policy recommendations are falling to state and even local government. The main policy-making body for public health at the national level is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They have not produced national guidelines for higher education. There is a recommendation specifically on testing, but there are no comprehensive guidelines. The responsibility has really fallen on the private sector, and I'm very pleased to say I'm on the task force for another association in the United States called the American College Health Association, ACHA. They are the professionals on campuses that actually run the student health centers, and they're primarily healthcare professionals. So as you might expect in the United States, it's a privatized system with guidance from the federal government. And I think we are all finding that this tremendous regional variation that is emerging is something that is of concern to most Americans.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a very important point, this decentralization. Actually, I sometimes compare the United States to the United States of Europe. You have so many different perspectives, and the country's dynamics need to be compared to the dynamics in Europe or in bigger parts of Africa or bigger parts of Latin America. It is
really
one
true.
country, but with all these very different approaches indeed.
So AC has tried to consolidate a lot of these documents and recommendations. And so at the conclusion of the program, I'll send you a link that shows this document that collects all of these guidelines.
Wonderful. I will share those through the IAU portal on the impact of COVID-19 on higher education, linking through to the ACE page. And there are similar activities carried on at the EU, in the ESU, Robert Napier, where you also try to understand at a global scale or at the European, but you work with other organizations from around the world. And maybe you can say a little bit about that as well. How are these dynamics being coordinated a bit nowadays? A dynamics that started pre-COVID and now has been probably impacted heavily as well in the current situation. And how are you as student groups also involved in the development of new policies to address the challenges we face?
Thank you very much, Riga. I will start with your last question. As the European Students' Union, especially at the European level, we are included in a lot of discussions. However, very much just like the United States, in Europe, it also depends that education remains a national competence even within the European Union, and therefore the situation varies a lot from one country to the other. However, we have seen that, for example, bodies such as the Council of Europe have tried to, as much as possible, gather the countries together into sharing best practices. And despite the fact that this has not led into a coordinated approach into how there's going to proceed with higher education, it has at least allowed countries to know what other countries are doing, to gather best practices examples, to understand what is going wrong, and then proceed with coordinating together how to make things work as best as possible in the coming academic year. So this has been a positive aspect that has truly come up. From the students' perspective, as I was also mentioning in the beginning, we have started over the past year trying to work on the global level. And we are working on the global level with partners from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the United States. So we're really trying to get a coordinated approach towards the student movement. It has been very unfortunate that in a lot of events you are asked about the global perspective and then you have someone who is not truly representative giving these perspectives. And what we are trying to do and tackle is exactly this, that we need representative voices to be present at the global level. And luckily, despite the fact that Corona has impacted this a bit and has delayed the process a bit, but the steering committee of the Global Students Forum has now been composed. There is an interim secretariat that has already started working, and therefore the process is developing. And we developed it right in time, I would say, because right now we are also dealing to try and also give input, for example, to UNESCO on the Futures of Education campaign that they are leading, which is now more important than ever before, because now we know how the pandemic has had an impact, a different impact, but a similar impact across the different regions. And together we are coming up with a coordinated approach to try and highlight what the priorities are. And truly, it's very easy to see that certain things, such as, for example, the inclusive part and the student support systems that need to be in place, are common wherever you go in Europe and are needed by the students wherever you are across the globe. So this is still allowing us to work together, dialogue together, and try as much as possible give policy input that even if it is given at different regions, it can still have a positive global effect in that regard.
Thank you very much. I would like to now give the floor to Sylvia, maybe also highlight the role of your university and universities in Mexico to the government. And maybe you have a bit of information on such dynamics in throughout Latin America. It's a big question, so you were not prepared for that one. But
no, thank you very much. But in the case of Mexico, I would like to say that we do have national guidelines for returning to institutions in general, not for universities. But the role of the National Association of Universities, and particularly in the case of the City of Mexico, of the network of universities of the city, they have been working, and I would like to stress the fact that they have been working collaboratively. No? And so what comes out as guidelines for reopening strategies are actually collaborative, no? And everybody has ownership on them. So I think this is a very important way of looking at how to develop the guidelines, because I think this collaborative view takes into account the very important differences between the different universities and makes whatever the guidelines actually suggest something that can be actually carried out by all of the universities. I have no information on what is happening in the other countries in Latin America. And so I can't say anything about that, but I would imagine that something similar is happening because there are national associations of universities in different countries. And I know that UDUAL, sorry that Roberto is not telling, UDUAL is also working very much on making universities think together on issues such as the ones that you have raised.
Yes, definitely. And we will also share the video recordings of the webinars that UDUAL has facilitated so that people can also learn from those. We have a special section with webinars that are being organized everywhere around the world so that people can also pick and choose where they would like to learn a bit more about. It's through this collaboration and exchange of ideas that we can get to a next step. So thank you very much for that. We will come back to you to maybe also possibly share some of those guidelines indeed online. Sushatwi, can I go to you because time is ticking, unfortunately. But okay, that's the rule of the game. Maybe you could come back to the issue that you raised on the professor bashing and how to maybe work between student organizations, between staff organizations to address these issues. I see that Ahmed is in line first. And maybe you would wish to say rather something on the collaboration between University South Africa and the government as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Hilly. Thank you, Hilly. And just to begin by saying that in South Africa too, we have a number of kind of intersecting kind of pathways, if you like, between government and universities, trade unions, student organizations, and so on. And that the attempt was really to try and understand how to build a platform that would produce some kind of social compact, if you like, as we moved into this, as we move through this pandemic, if you like. What we've also seen is the creation of a number of advisory bodies by the government, which involve many university researchers and so on. And that collaboration, of course, from time to time, there's been tensions, but largely speaking, that collaboration has worked well. And perhaps most importantly, I should say that there's been a very significant repurposing of research and innovation at the universities in response to COVID-19. Just an example would be kind of vaccine development, for example, which was mainly kind of aimed at things like HIV, are now kind of have now been repurposed for other for COVID-19 and so on. So there's been a lot of collaboration, and of course, it's not always plain sailing. There's always tensions and so on. But again, like in Mexico and elsewhere, there's also been kind of guidelines which have been produced nationally, but through a collaborative process, if you like. So that has been a good working experience, if you like. I just want to emphasize, it doesn't mean that there's always been kind of a peaceful collaboration, if you like. There's also been a lot of tensions and so on, but that's a part of the enterprise, I think. Thank you.
It's probably part of humanity, no? We need to cooperate, but also compete. There is some of that dynamic that we cannot avoid, but maybe is that is also part. I was looking at a question at the same time, but that is also part of human nature, and maybe also conducive to innovation. So let's cherish those dynamics as well. I would like to try and get Professor Sushadvi Suwansavat online, but I'm not too sure that he is still with us. So maybe that I will have the opportunity to discuss with him also at a later stage. It's also getting very late in Thailand already. I would like to then give one word to every of you. Would you have one or two sentences that you would wish to still share? I know we're a bit over time, and maybe you would wish to just say one or two words. I would like to conclude by thanking you very warmly and say that this is only a first conversation on this issue, and that we will continue this in the future as well. The webinar series of the IAU continues in the fall. This webinar itself is recorded and will be shared online and with all those who registered for this webinar in particular, and will be shared with the global higher education community represented by the IAU. And we will get back to each and every one of you with a request to also share what you can on those strategies that we've been discussing, guidelines or strategies or the others. I would also like to mention that this discussion is very timely as I participate with many members of the IAU community in the UN High-Level Political Forum on assessing where we are on Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And since I have been invited to chair or speak in a few of the sessions during the week and next week as well, I will certainly refer to what you have been saying during this session and mention and refer to you in particular with the work that you have been doing. So it's been useful for me as well to inform the kind of presentations I will be able to make. So I would like to then give the floor to Pam first. And if we can, and if people still are with us, we could give the floor to each and every one of you for just one sentence. Pam, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I would just like to thank you all for participating. And as Hirit was saying, it is important that we are sharing those things, which means that each one of us can be involved in debates and bring a joint voice and also bring the different perspectives. I am concerned that we have differences between countries, and we have a risk of each country to take care of themselves first, and that is not something that we can see for the higher education. We need to take responsibility for the global world. Otherwise, we will not reach any sustainability for the future. So I really thank you all for sharing, and I hope that you will join and share more for the future also. Thank you very much.
Okay. I have just been informed by the master organizer of the webinar that unfortunately our time is up on this platform for now. So where I promised a few last words from each of you, we will get into a conversation on the different points together in the near future, and we will bring you back to the different fora that we organize for everyone to hear your views. So apologies for having promised a last sentence. Thank you very much for your excellent discussion and feeding the discussion with such excellent information. And we will be in touch for future endeavors together. So thank you, to the speakers, to you, Pam, for the moderation, and to all the participants for having taken part today. And we will share both the webinar recording and the PowerPoint presentations with all. Thank you very much. Have a good end of the day.